All right, good morning. Once again, it's good to see everybody here. Really good crowd. Appreciate the visitors who've come to join in our worship. Appreciate your presence here. Hopefully you'll feel as welcomed as you are as you worship with us. We have been going through verse by verse through the book of Matthew. Our ultimate goal is to go through the whole New Testament. But right now we find ourselves in the book of Matthew, in Matthew chapter 26. So if you want to open up there, it'd be helpful if you follow along. If you don't have your own Bible, there should be a Bible in one of the seats in front of you. But we'll be in Matthew chapter 26. Now as we begin chapter 26, we begin really the end of a very busy day by Jesus. As we mentioned a few weeks ago, that last week before Jesus was crucified, at least as far as the recorded record that we have, Tuesday was the most busy day, traditionally. A lot happened on Tuesday. We had Jesus going to the temple. He curses the barren fig tree, which withers up right there before him and his disciples. He goes into Jerusalem and he's questioned about his authority because he had cleansed the temple the day before. And they say, by what authority do you do these things? And this begins a long dialogue between Jesus and the religious leaders who are trying to trap Jesus and put him in a corner, asking him what they thought were very difficult questions, but Jesus answers them very easily. And then Jesus himself posing questions to them. And then we also have his, basically his pronouncement against the religious leaders that were there at that time, who he calls the scribes, Pharisees, and hypocrites there in chapter 23. He goes through this long list of things, the ways that they missed it in their approach towards their relationship with God, religiously, spiritually, and in every way. And then not only that, he goes to the Mount of Olives with his disciples, and he does what is called the Olivet Discourse, which is a very lengthy teaching by Jesus concerning what was about to take place, both within their generation with the destruction of Jerusalem, but carrying on even to his second coming, and their need to be alert and to be ready for his coming. And then in chapter 25, it continues on where he talks about this is how you get ready. And he gives several instances of how a person can be ready for his second coming. So it's been a very long day for Jesus here. And now we're getting to the close. This is probably Tuesday evening. According to the Jewish way of keeping time, this would have been the beginning of Wednesday. Their new day started at the end of the day. But nonetheless, this is at the end of a long day for Jesus. And so as we get to these first few verses in chapter 26, this could be taking place either while Jesus is traveling from the Mount of Olives to Bethany, which was about 1.6 miles. He would have had plenty of time to talk about things with his disciples. Or it could be happening while he's in Bethany, but he's giving them a heads up of what is about to take place. And this is what happens. This is Matthew chapter 26, starting in verse 1. When Jesus had finished all these words, he said to his disciples, "You know that after 2 days the Passover is coming, and the Son of Man is to be handed over for crucifixion." So either as he's traveling to Bethany, or maybe this is still at the Mount of Olives, don't know, but at some point after his Olivet Discourse, he tells his disciples, in 2 days, I'm going to be crucified. We think, okay, yeah, he's going to be crucified. He told them that before. But think about it in the context of what he had just told them. In chapter 25, in verse 31, he'd already told them, "But when the Son of Man comes in his glory, and all the angels with him, then he will sit on his glorious throne." And he goes on to describe that all the nations would be gathered before him and he would pass judgment on them. And you have this, at the end of the Olivet Discourse, this beautiful picture of Christ and his glory and his victory and in his judgment over the world. But now, shortly after that, he's saying, yeah, in 2 days I'm going to be crucified. What do you think's going through the disciples' mind as they hear Jesus say that? Maybe they're still on the high of recognizing, hey, we're in with Jesus, and he's going to be sitting on a glorious throne, and we're going to be there right there with him. But now all of a sudden he's talking about crucifixion, the most cruel death a person could ever endure. And so the future glory is tempered by the present sufferings that was about to take place. And I would say that's very true to our lives, our spiritual lives, right? We go to church and we just revel in the fact that one day that Jesus is coming again. He's going to usher in the new heavens, the new earth, where there will be no sickness, no crying, no suffering, no hardship. The sun won't beat down on us anymore. Very important for us in South Texas. All of our troubles and trials will be taken away, and we just revel in that. We hope in that, and we can't wait until Jesus comes again. We can't wait until we are with him without all of these different trials and difficulties. But then Monday morning comes, and we find ourselves in the present trial. And constantly we're in this conflict between our future hope or our present situation. And that's what Jesus is dealing with here. And however much that might concern us and perplex us, we can at least be comforted in the fact that Jesus felt the same thing. He too knew what it was like to know that good things are coming, but also to know that very closely bad things are coming as well. So maybe you're like Jesus. Maybe today, you're happy that he's coming again, that heaven is coming. But in one day or 2 days, be like Jesus. Monday morning, Tuesday morning, Wednesday morning, you know some things are going to happen that just really weigh on your heart. Take comfort in the fact that Jesus knows that. The Hebrew writer tells us that he is a sympathetic high priest. He knows our sufferings. He knows what it feels like to go through these things. And so we can take comfort in that. Well, verse 3 picks up. It says, then the chief priests and the elders of the people were gathered together in the court of the high priest named Caiaphas, and they plotted together to seize Jesus by stealth and kill him. But they were saying, not during the festival, otherwise a riot might occur among the people. So the chief priests, the elders, these are the religious leaders. These are the leaders of the Jewish people there in Jerusalem. And they're plotting against Jesus. They're waiting for an opportunity to kill him. But the only thing holding them back was the fact that there was this festival going on. And this was the feast, of course, of Passover, but also the Feast of Unleavened Bread happened at the same time. People were coming from all places to come to Jerusalem to keep this feast. Thousands upon thousands, and depending on what source you go to, will give you a different amount of people that would come to Jerusalem during the time of Passover. But we know it's at least thousands, perhaps tens of thousands of people that migrated or came to Jerusalem to keep this feast. And so Jerusalem would have been packed with people within Jerusalem, people camping outside of Jerusalem, a humongous crowd. And the last thing that these religious leaders wanted to do was to offend them and to do something against them. And keep in mind, some of these people that were coming to the feast were people from like the land of Galilee up north, where Jesus' ministry was very popular. Matthew focuses on the Galilean ministry quite a bit, and Jesus did many wonderful miracles. The people really held him as a great person, and they were coming to the feast. And so the religious leaders didn't want to cause a big riot. The other reason they didn't want to create a big riot is that the Roman Empire just wouldn't put up with riots. You'll see that as you go through the book of Acts, that there were great consequences for people who were in charge of a city or a particular region, and there were riots. That's how Rome kept their rule in order. Anytime a riot would come, they would snuff it out. And so the leaders here don't want to create a riot and get attention of the Roman authorities. So there's a lot going on here, but the main thing is that they want to kill Jesus, but they don't have the opportunity yet. At least they don't feel like they do. Things will change in a moment, but for now they don't have an opportunity. Which shows that, sometimes a person can have a particular heart towards something or have a desire to do something and yet only lack the opportunity to do it. You see, these people were already, in a sense, guilty before God because they wanted Jesus killed. Previously in Matthew chapter 5, Jesus said that it's not just the murder that puts a person guilty before God, but even the desire for someone to be dead is similar to murder. He says in Matthew 5:21, "For you have heard that the ancients were told, you shall not commit murder, and whoever commits murder shall be liable to the court. But I say to you that everyone who is angry with his brother shall be guilty before the court, and whoever says to his brother, you good for nothing, shall be guilty before the Supreme Court, and whoever says you fool shall be guilty enough to go into the fiery hell. And so we can't look at that in too much detail. We studied that when we were in the Sermon on the Mount. But the main idea is that, yeah, you may not physically kill somebody, but if you view that person as though you wish they were dead, and here in their case they were plotting to make him dead, it's the same as murder. The only thing that kept these people from murdering Jesus was the circumstances at this point. And I wonder if that's not true with us as well. I think sometimes maybe we give ourselves too much credit. We think about, well, we might look down on those who perhaps are abusing drugs or in a lifestyle of prostitution or maybe even other things. And we look on them and say, how could they get involved in that? How could they do that? How could a person do this? If we're really humble and we really look at ourselves, we might say, you know what, if circumstances were different from me, who's to say that I wouldn't be involved in that as well? I think we would be surprised how much God has protected us through our circumstances to keep us from certain sins and certain things. And that's why we need to have a humble heart and to not look condescendingly upon other people, but to try to help them and to guide them in the ways of Christ, but not in a condescending or condemning way. And also to look at ourselves with humility, not to think too highly of ourselves. We should just be thankful to the Lord. What did Paul say? By the grace of God, I am what I am. And it's through the grace of God that we are who we are, that we have escaped so many different traps and things that other people have gotten involved in. So circumstances were the only thing that were keeping these guys from attacking him. Now, as we look at what's going on in Jerusalem, this plotting by the chief priests and the elders wanting to have Jesus killed, now let's contrast that with what's about to happen in Bethany. And we mentioned this a few Sundays ago. It's very interesting, and it's subtle in the way that Matthew does it, but it's definitely there. As you go through and you look at these last few chapters of Matthew, there's a contrast that arises between Jerusalem and Bethany. In Jerusalem, there's questioning of Jesus' authority. There's trying to entrap him. Here we find out that they're plotting to kill him. But in Bethany, there's nothing but love for Christ. In Bethany, that's where the Jesus lovers were residing. These are the people who were friends with Jesus, who loved Jesus, who invited him into their home, who were completely devoted to Jesus. And so there's a contrast here between the two. Just as there's a contrast in the world today. In the world, there are people who want to snuff Christ out. They think that Christianity or anything connected to Christ is just getting in the way of progress, and they want to get rid of it, move past that, they would say. But then there's those, and hopefully we are among that number, who are the Bethany Jesus lovers. Those who say, you know what, the world can say what they want to say. They can try to get rid of Jesus, but we're just going to love him. We're just going to be devoted to him. We're going to be friends of Jesus. We're going to be devoted to Jesus. We're going to be those who invite Jesus into our home, into our lives, as these people did in Bethany. So this picks up in verse 6, Matthew 26 and verse 6. Now when Jesus was in Bethany, at the home of Simon the leper, a woman came to him with an alabaster vial of very costly perfume, and she poured it on his head as he reclined at the table. Now this is amazing in and of itself. Jesus was in Bethany at the home of Simon the leper. He's got 2 days left in his ministry. He's about to be crucified, put to death. And where does he find himself? Trying to squeeze in with the religious leaders there in Jerusalem, trying to find a real prestigious place to stay, maybe calling up Joseph of Arimathea, saying, hey, or Nicodemus, someone else that he had spoken to who had a lot of influence, saying, hey, can I stay at your house? No, he goes to Bethany and stays at a leper's house. A leper, if you're familiar with leprosy, back then, it was still a ruling disease, but back then it was even worse. They didn't have the medicines to deal with it like we do in America, but it would basically just rot a person's flesh. It would slowly, depending on your immune system, it did different things, but oftentimes it would lead to death. And it not only would afflict you physically, but also socially. People didn't want to be around the lepers, much like the coronavirus today. Get away, go into your little leper colony so that we won't be infected. And they were commanded to do that in the law of Moses. But it affected them socially, it affected them spiritually. They weren't allowed into the temple. So if you were a leper, it was very bad stuff. You didn't want to contract leprosy. It's interesting here in the book of Matthew that the first miracle in which we have any type of detail is in the cleansing of a leper. Now in Matthew 4, it did mention him going into the regions and healing many people who were sick, but it's only talking generally. But after the Sermon on the Mount in chapters 5 through 7, when you get to chapter 8, the first one in which we have a lot of detail is on a leper, the cleansing of a leper. And it's believed that this Simon the leper didn't have leprosy anymore. It's very unlikely that people would be congregating at his house if he still had leprosy. It's believed that he was a person who was cured of leprosy, but still kept the title. It was a way that people recognized, he's the one who was the leper. He was the one that was cleansed by Jesus. But here we have, towards the end, Jesus in the home of a leper, which I think is a great picture of the spiritual life for us. It starts out with the cleansing of the leper. That's Jesus' first action in our lives. As we come to him in faith, as we believe in him, we confess him, we repent of our sins, we're buried with him in baptism, as Romans chapter 6 talks about. As we just commit ourselves to Christ, we find himself cleansing us of our leprosy. That is our spiritual leprosy. We were sick, we were destined for death, we were separated from the people of God, we were separated from God himself. This sin that was within us was like an infection that was growing ever more and more and producing more and more death in us, but we came into contact with Christ, or maybe we could say Jesus came into contact with us to stay in keeping with the account in Matthew chapter 8. And he touched our lives and we were healed. And we experienced the power of Christ in our lives to change us, intrinsically change us. But then we get to this part where we just find the Jesus who wants to abide with us. He wants to live with us. Yeah, we've had his power demonstrated and he cleansed us, but now he wants to abide with us, to eat supper with us. Remember what it tells us in the book of Revelation? If here I stand at the door and knock. When we would open up the door to me, I will come in and dine with him. He's not speaking to people outside of Christ. He's talking to the church. Open up the door. I want to dine with you. He wants to dine with those whom he's already cleansed, in other words, as he did with Simon the leper. And that's a wonderful thing. But then as we get into verse 7, we see that there's a woman also present here in the household. It says, a woman came to him with an alabaster vial of costly perfume, and she poured it on his head as he reclined at the table. Now who this woman is, some would speculate this is Mary of John chapter 12. And there's good reason for that, because there are some similarities. If you remember in John chapter 12, Jesus is there also in the house of Martha, and Mary comes in and she anoints his feet and wipes it with the hairs of her head, and she's just showing devotion to the Lord. And he makes similar statements about the poor, or she's criticized, and he makes similar statements in this story, as we'll see as we go through, about the fact that the poor you always have with you, but you don't have me with you always. And so some say that this is the same event. I don't really take it that way. For one, in John chapter 12, it starts out by saying 6 days before the Passover it took place. This is 2 days before he's going to be crucified. Also, there's other differences as far as Mary anointed his feet. Here we have a woman anointing his head. There's just enough differences where I think this is a different event, but very important nonetheless. So we don't really know who this woman is, but we do know that she was very highly devoted to Christ, because she comes to him with this alabaster vial of costly perfume. Now, alabaster is a mineral that's white and very translucent, very beautiful mineral. And people make statues and figurines and beautiful things, lamps, out of this alabaster. It's a very beautiful substance. And back then, they had these alabaster boxes, as some translations take it, an alabaster box that was made out of alabaster, and inside of it was this perfume, or this ointment, this fragrance, this substance that produced fragrance. And they would put it inside this box. And this was usually given to a woman when she came to the point of, or to the age of marriage. When she was now eligible to become married, her parents would give her this alabaster box with ointment. And she would take that, and it's kind of interesting, the size of your alabaster box, how well decorated it was a status symbol in a sense. It showed how much wealth the family had, and maybe it was used to coerce other men who would marry this daughter of theirs, and one wasn't the other. But nonetheless, she had this alabaster box, and it was filled with this ointment, and this was something that was very valuable. In Mark chapter 14, we're told that it was worth 300 denarii, and a denarii was the pay for a laborer back then for a full day, so almost a year's wage. You think about the salary for a laborer today, you're looking at tens of thousands of dollars. So it's very, very expensive. So it's valuable because it was sentimental. It was given to her by her parents, and it meant that she was of the age of marriage. But it was valuable monetarily as well. Very valuable, this alabaster box filled with this perfume. But the Markan account in Mark chapter 14 tells us that she broke it and poured it out to the Lord. And some think, well, she probably didn't literally break it, probably just broke the seal and poured it out. But nonetheless, she broke it and poured it out on the head of Christ, a sign of devotion to him. Very precious, very valuable, but she was willing to pour that out on him. Which leads us with the opportunity to maybe reflect on our own lives and to think about us as well in the spiritual life. When we think about our connection to Christ, our relationship to Christ, we too ought to be like this alabaster box filled with perfume. In other words, if we're really going to be poured out before him, if we're really going to emit a beautiful fragrance to him, a sweet smelling aroma to the Lord, living a life that is just beautiful before him, you know what it starts with? It starts with the breaking of the box. That's the most difficult part and the hardest part for us, but it's one of the most necessary parts. We have to come before him broken. That is, our outer man, our outer person has to come to him broken. Which means that we quit trusting in ourselves. We quit putting all of our hopes, put all of our effort into ourselves, trying to earn anything on our own behalf, raising ourselves up to God and expecting to accomplish things without him and only trusting in the strength of the flesh. We got to come to him broken. Say, Lord, there's nothing in me of worth. There's nothing in me, Lord, that can do anything that is beneficial to you. Remember in John chapter 15, Jesus said, unless you abide in me, you can do nothing. Without me, you can do nothing. And that's what we have to come to terms with and grips with. I can't trust in my talents. I can't trust in my physical strength or my mental agility. I can't trust in any of that. God might utilize those things, but I can't trust in those things. I ultimately got to trust in him and come to him broken, humble, broken, saying, Lord, I need you to work in me. I need you to accomplish what your good will is for me. But we come to him broken. And then when we come to him broken, that's when the precious ointment can flow out. That's when the ointment of praise, worship, adoration, devotion to the Lord can be poured out. You see, as long as we think we have it all together and we're not broken yet, where does the praise go to? It goes to us. Look what I accomplished. Look what I can do. Look how talented I am. But when we are broken, then all the praise goes to him. All the glory goes to him. And so one of the things that is symbolized by this pouring out of this perfume on the head of Christ is that of devotion. And that is reflected in our spiritual lives, not by physically pouring something out, but by spiritually, emotionally pouring ourselves out to the Lord, because we are broken before him, realize we can do nothing without him, and we give him all the praise, all the glory. And so there's devotion implied here, but also commitment as well. Commitment to the Lord. So let's go back to this idea of this being the alabaster vial, something given to her by her parents for marriage, right? You're old enough to be married, daughter. Here's your alabaster box full of perfume. By her breaking this box and pouring it out on Christ, what do you think she's saying? I'm not going to get married to a man. I'm giving up on my hopes of being married. Why? Because I want to fully commit to Christ. On the wedding night, that's what the bride would do. When they came together, one of the first things she would do is she would break this box and she would pour it on her husband, saying, I'm committing myself to you. I'm giving my life to you. She's doing this to Christ, not to say that she physically is marrying Christ, but to say that I'm committing myself to you. I'm giving up all my hopes over here to put all my hopes in you and to totally commit to you. So there's commitment involved here with this pouring out of this vial. So there's devotion, there's commitment, but there's also submission as well. Where did she pour it? As we mentioned, she poured it on his head. And in scriptures, the head is a symbol of authority. If you go to 1 Corinthians chapter 11, remember that whole difficult passages about head coverings and things, highly debated. But one of the things that Paul talks about there in 1 Corinthians chapter 11 is this idea of the head. He says the head of every man is Christ, and the head of every woman is the man. And what is he talking about? He's talking about authority. And so the man should be following Christ. The wife submits herself to her husband as the church submits to Christ, Ephesians chapter 5. But the idea is authority. So her pouring this vial of perfume on his head is a way of submitting to him and submitting to his authority. And that's what we do as well when we come to Christ. When we come to him broken, again, no longer trusting in ourselves, we pour out our devotion, our love, our adoration, our worship, our glory to him. We commit our lives to him, saying, Lord, my life is no longer about this, but it's all about you. We also submit to him, and we submit to his authority in our lives. You know what, Joey? It's no longer about you. Much as you might want it to be, it's no longer about you. You have to submit now to Christ. That's what you committed yourself to. So you have devotion, commitment, and submission. And all of this happens at the same time, simultaneously. It's not like she came to him with this alabaster box and broke it, and then she poured it. Oh, that's devotion. Oh, that's commitment. Oh, that's submission. When she poured it out, all of that came out. And when we come to the Lord broken, and when we pour ourselves out before him, it comes out simultaneously in devotion, in commitment to him, in submission to him. It just all works together in that way. But notice where Jesus is when she does this. It says, as he was reclined at the table, the last part of verse 7. As he was reclined at the table. It's interesting that Jesus is reclined at the table at this point. I don't know, if I knew in 2 days that I was about to be crucified, experience the most excruciating pain. You know, the Romans, they perfected this scientifically. They invented crucifixion to be as painful as a person could be without passing out. That was their goal. And the word excruciating actually finds its root in crucifixion. They had to invent a word to describe the pain that is experienced at the cross in crucifixion. And here, Jesus is about to experience that. And not only just experience the pain, but also experience death in just 2 days. But he's reclining at the table. Not biting his nails, not pacing the floor, not, being antsy or anything like that. He's just reclining at the table. He's in a position of rest. And as she poured out this oil upon him, she would have found a Savior who is at rest. And when we pour ourselves out before the Lord, when we are broken, and we pour ourselves out in devotion, commitment, and submission, we too find a Savior who is at rest. In Hebrews chapter 10, we're told that after Jesus was crucified, after he gave himself as a sacrifice, he sat down. In verse 11 of Hebrews 10, it says, every priest stands daily ministering and offering time after time the same sacrifice. And notice the priest stands every day, ministering and offering time after time the same sacrifices, which can never take away sins. But he, that is Jesus, having offered one sacrifice for sins for all time, sat down at the right hand of God. Not standing and ministering these offerings, but sitting down. In other words, he's at rest. Christ, having already accomplished all for all, is now at rest next to the Father. We could say reclining next to the Father, sitting down next to him. He's at rest. He's not Here in 2020, he's not pacing the floor. Oh, I wonder how this is going to turn out. I wonder what's going to go on with the coronavirus or all this chaos that's going on over here. I don't know what's going to happen. No, he's at rest. And when we commit ourselves to him, we also sit down with him. In Ephesians chapter 2, in verse 6, it says, and raised us up with him. This is after we've been saved, we've been raised up with him, and seated us with him in the heavenly places in Christ Jesus. So he's seated at the right hand. We're seated with him. We should be at rest with him. And I guarantee you, I can tell you this from my own experience, both scripturally and experimentally, that when you pour out your life to the Lord, when you devote yourself completely over to him, broken before him, committed to him, submitted to his authority, you know what automatically happens? Without exception, you enter into a state of rest. I've experienced both sides. The days that I have woken up just completely submitted to the Lord, saying, God, I don't care what happens today. I don't care if I have to deal with the most difficult situations. I don't care what comes at me. I just submit to you. Even if you bring good things or bad things, I just give it all to you. I'm committed to you. On those days, I've never experienced more rest. Anxiety flees, fears flee, everything. You just are seated down with Christ in the heavenly places. Conversely, on the days when I woke up, things are not going my way. This is not how I planned it. This is not in according to my schedule. That person is speaking to me in a way that I wish they wouldn't speak to me. Or, and I was just holding on and latching on to wanting things the way that I wanted them. I wanted things to happen this way and that way. And I had a vision of how things were going to turn out, and they didn't turn out that way. There's just consternation and anxiety and fear, and there's just this struggling that is continually going on. Why? Because we're trying to create our own future and create our own kingdom. And that takes an immense amount of work. Doesn't take any work to submit to Christ. Just rest in him. Lord, whatever happens, let it happen. I'm at rest with you. I think here in 2020, where anxieties are out the roof, I think this could be the answer. This could be the answer to take away a lot of the fear that people are experiencing today. Be broken before Christ. Pour yourself out to Christ. Be devoted to him, submitted to him, committed to him. And see what happens with those anxieties and fears and unrest. He's seated down. He's reclining when she pours this out. When she does that, she can be reclined with him, in a sense. Well, then we get to verse 8. So far, a beautiful picture of devotion, commitment to the Lord. Beautiful picture. But in verse 8, things changed. But the disciples were indignant when they saw this and said, "Why this waste? For this perfume might have been sold for a high price and the money given to the poor." This beautiful thing that just happened. We would love to have been there to see this. And she's being criticized. Why this waste? Hey, if you don't want your alabaster vial of precious ointment, don't break it, don't pour it out, sell it, give it to the poor. Put some use to it. What means this waste? And I guarantee you that when you do the same thing that she did, maybe not physically, but spiritually, when you give your all to the Lord, you know what people are going to say? Why this waste? You're wasting your life. You're wasting your time. Why do you go every Sunday to church and spend that big old block of hours, especially when you could be home watching the Cowboys or watching some other sports team or out fishing or something? Why are you wasting your time? Don't you know that today we live, tomorrow we die? Life is short. Go out and enjoy life. Don't waste your time with this whole Jesus thing. Don't waste your life in religion or spirituality or anything like that. Just go out and have fun. Don't waste your time. Or maybe they'll say something like this: what a waste of talent. Maybe it's a person who commits himself to teaching the word. Maybe he's a very intelligent person, a very gifted person, maybe a very good communicator, and they might look at that person and say, what a waste. You know, in the business field, he could be making millions of dollars using his talent. He could be doing all types of wonderful things with that talent. And here he is, just preaching the word, earning pennies and dimes, as the case may be sometimes. And they see that as a waste of talent. Could be someone who's a very good singer and commits that to the Lord. It could be a lot of different things, but they see that a waste of talent with a person who commits that talent to the Lord. They might see a waste in money or a waste in possessions. The list could go on. But in the end, they look at what you're doing when you're committed to Christ, submitted to Christ, devoted to Christ, and all they see is waste. All they see is waste. But what's the answer to that? Because maybe on the outside it does look like waste. Well, let's look at how Jesus answers them. In verse 10, but Jesus, aware of this, said to them, why do you bother the woman? So he's about to make a defense to her. And we too have him as our defense. When the accuser comes against us, we have Christ as our intercessor, as our mediator to plead our case. But nonetheless, he says, why do you bother the woman? For she has done a good deed to me. For you always have the poor with you, but you do not always have me. For when she poured this perfume on my body, she did it to prepare me for burial. Truly I say to you, wherever this gospel is preached in the whole world, what this woman has done will also be spoken of her, or spoken of in memory of her. So here, he gives several defenses to what she did, and these same defenses could be offered for us when we commit our lives to the Lord. For one, he says, for she has done a good deed to me. She has done a good thing to me. Nothing you do to Christ, for the sake of Christ, is vain or wasted. Every good deed you do to the Lord is not wasted. What did he talk about in chapter 25 there? He says, in that you did it to the least of these, my brethren, you did it unto me. And when we're involved in good deeds, good works, we're loving others, we're doing it as to Christ. That's not a waste. How can anyone say doing something to Christ or for Christ is a waste? This is a good deed that she did to me. Don't bother her. This is to me. The second thing here is for the sake of opportunity. In verse 11 it says, for you always have the poor with you, but you do not always have me. The opportunities that we have makes this not a waste. Okay, let's go back to this statement. Oh, today we live, tomorrow we die. Go out and enjoy life. How about today we live, tomorrow we die? Let's be committed to Christ. This is the opportunity that we have. We have eternity to enjoy comfort, peace, security, all of those other things. But we have this short life to be committed to Christ and devotion to him as we live here. We'll get all of that. We'll get the comfort. We'll get the joys. We'll get the peace. We'll get all that one day. But now is the day that we live a life of sacrifice and an offering to him, devoted, committed, submitted to him. On the other side, if you're looking at it just from a worldly standpoint, you know, someone might say, okay, this person's wasting his time, his talents, his hobbies. But think about it. I mean, the ability to make money will one day come and go. The money that you earn will just be given to another. The talents that you express, you'll no longer be able to express them when you go to the grave. You can't take it with you when you go. All these different things. The world will continue on even after you're long and gone. You're gone. In other words, be committed to the Lord. The world's going to do the world's things. That's always going to be the same. But you be committed to Christ is the idea. And then in verse 12, there's the prophetic side of good works. For he says, for when she poured this perfume on my body, she did it to prepare me for burial. All the disciples living with Jesus, eating with Jesus, sleeping out in the wilderness with Jesus, going through all this, learning firsthand from Jesus, his teachings, didn't understand the significance. But this woman did. She understood what was about to take place, maybe more so than anyone else in the room. And what she did was prophetic. She's pouring out this oil because she knows Jesus is about to die. Who knows? And this is speculation. This is Joey speaking, by the way. But maybe she's even alluding to the resurrection. I know he's going to die, but he's going to rise again, and I'm not going to have the opportunity to prepare him for burial because he's not going to be buried long. So I need to do it now. It doesn't say it in the text, speculation, but it's a possibility. Either way, she knew more about what was going on than the other people in the room. And when we give our lives to the Lord, again, broken, submitted, committed, devoted to him, in a sense, it's prophetic in the sense that we're doing it because we know he's coming again. When we are involved in good deeds, when we give our lives to him, it's a proclamation that we're making outwardly that we believe that he is coming again, that life does mean something, that as the last few verses of 1 Corinthians chapter 15 says, because of the resurrection, your labor is not in vain in the Lord. Everything that you do does have a purpose. And every time we sacrifice ourselves for the good of the other, we sacrifice ourselves for the good of Christ, we're making a proclamation that he is coming again, and we're living for the future hope that he has given us. So our good works are prophetic in a sense that they speak of future blessings that we are working towards. But then in verse 13, truly I say to you, wherever this gospel is preached in the whole world, what this woman has done will also be spoken of in memory of her. And this is the last thing. Your devotion to Christ is not wasted. Why? Because it will be remembered. People may not remember the small things, small little successes that we pride ourselves in this world. They may not remember in 100 years that you got a doctorate degree at some university. Not knocking that. Those are good endeavors. But if that's all we're living for, one day those things will be forgotten. But you know what will never be forgotten? Your devotion to Christ, your service to him, those things will always be remembered. What did the Hebrew writer tell his readers? He says, God is not unjust to forget all the good deeds that you have been partaking in. And he's not going to forget ours either. The world might forget, but God never forgets. And when we enter into eternity in heaven and in the new heavens and new earth that God has prepared for eternity, we'll have these memories of service to the Lord and other people. And the Lord himself will have memories of the good service that we offered. So this is a lot of reasons why a life devoted to Christ is not wasted. It's done to Christ. He sees the opportunity, we could say. It's prophetic, and then also it won't be forgotten. Lots of good reasons. So there's really no excuse as we close the lesson today. There's no excuse why we wouldn't be broken before him, pour out ourselves upon him in devotion, commitment, and submission, because we know it's not a waste. And it's not in vain, but it serves a purpose that maybe we don't even fully comprehend today, but one day we will. So let's do that today. Let's be committed to the Lord. Maybe you could spend some time with the Lord this afternoon, some time in solitude where you just come to him and say, Lord, I'm tired of living for myself. I'm tired of being constantly in the rat race of the world, trying to hold on to my own agenda, my own to you. And maybe you're here this morning, you haven't even given your life to Christ yet, put your faith in Christ. I would say the same thing. Now's the time to pour out yourself before him. Be broken. Realize that you cannot achieve the righteousness that can be supplied to you through Jesus Christ. Come to him humbly, broken before him, ready to be poured out for him, to know that there is a future hope and there is a good end state that you could be living for. So if you want to do that today, please come forward as we stand and sing the song that JT has prepared.